Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the tragic 737 MAX crashes. I'm Jeffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say, joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Viewers, this episode is 229. We're calling it Redundancy. We've had many comments from viewers on our episode about the Lionair 610 crash, and overwhelmingly they are shocked at the revelations we have made about the first officers or co-pilots training and skill level, as well as Lionair procedures. But some do raise important points, Richard, which we hope to address in today's episode.
Yeah, so Jeffrey, here comes the first one from Ivan 1V05. Pilot training issues, maintenance issues, okay. But I don't think I heard you use the word redundancy once. As you say, software adjustments are common. Airbus 777, 787, all fly-by-wire planes do that. But they also make sure they use redundancy on all important components. MCAS, that automatically adjusts flying parameters, was acting on one sensor. If they did their job properly at Boeing and used multiple angle of attack sensors, this would never have happened. The software itself wasn't quite kosher. Either it wasn't able to detect that it was going through a loop again and again, or whatever. But actually, Ivan, you're being a bit unreasonable with this point because you raised the same question in a previous episode, 216, and we answered it in full and discussed redundancy and the issue of a single angle of attack sensor. And meanwhile, Boeing have changed that. But
Hmm.
nevertheless, it's a good point. What do you think, Jeffrey?
Yes, look, it is a good point, Richard, and it relates, of course, to the use of one angle attack vane, one source of failure. The 737 prior to the grounding had two angle of attack vanes, and the system alternated between the two for each separate flight. Now, here's a key point here. Boeing did have the option of both being used, but many and probably most airlines didn't adopt it because it cost money. Now, this was allowed under what is called grandfather rights, a system I actually don't agree with. It means that an aircraft can be certified as originally designed or recertified as originally designed as long as it's the same basic model, such as the 737. This means that learnings from air crashes or advances in safety systems do not have to be incorporated into modifications of a new version with, say, more powerful engines or increased length or modifications to the wing. Now, I understand that this has cost implications in the cockpit, but what price safety? Boeing does offer, as I said, a variety of safety options, as we have outlined yesterday, but most airlines simply opt out because the accountants rule, which is not a good situation.
And accountants shouldn't rule on safety issues.
No.
You make a very good point, Jeffrey. So here's a next one from at Future Systems 738. And he questions the AOA displays. He says, great coverage, gentlemen, and exactly what I said episodes ago, that the events were fully manageable by a properly trained crew. Appalling piloting skills and multiple failures by the company were the single biggest cause here. Very sad. And P.S. I do not think the additional option of AOA displays would have helped this crew at all. They were simply not up to the job. MCAS was only one of numerous holes in the Swiss cheese.
Yes, look,
Jeffrey.
yeah,
Mm.
I do agree, as they missed many other cues and ignored various warnings and didn't even brief properly. So it's highly likely they would have missed the AOA displays on the pilot's display completely. So I think that's a very, very good point that was made.
Yeah. And here comes the next one from Jeffrey Guy. Raises an interesting point at Guy UK.
Mm.
Yes, Lionair and its pilots were to blame, but what struck me was that Boeing wanted to monetize safety add-ons. There was either necessary or it's not necessary. It's the equivalent of not having brakes on a car when or specifying a sunroof or alloys. Uh, these features should never have been optional. What do you think about that?
Well, look, I do agree. Absolutely spot on, Guy. They should all be standard as they now are on the 787. Every safety feature on the 787 is simply standard. The commercial aviation industry has a crazy history of options. On one hand, aircraft manufacturers want to make every single aircraft identical. They hate options. And they want to make it, they want to make every aeroplane identical because it cuts costs and streamlines production. On the other hand, airlines want options to tailor their aircraft to their corporate branding or whatever. And to secure a 200 aircraft order, manufacturers will do almost anything. Let's go back. Remember the 101 shades of white paint for the 747? Or the 30 different clipboard options in the cockpit of the 747? And it goes on. On the 737, one very large airline didn't want window shades on its aircraft to cut costs. So there are some low-cost airlines who fly 737s and there's no window shades. What I did recently on one of those was to grab the safety card and shove that into the hole where the window shade would go to try and cut out the sun. So, as mentioned, the 787 broke that tradition, and nothing is an option when it comes to the cockpit. And I can assure you, Boeing's next aircraft, the 797, whenever it comes, will be the same. No options in the cockpit.
Yeah. And the next one, Jeffrey, comes from at Josh Womack 22, and he has his doubts and says, I will listen through again, but I believe the pilots were cleared in the Lion Air crash.
Yes, Josh, you're dead right. The pilots were cleared of any responsibility, and that is, in fact, what we are saying also. Clearly, who should take the blame, or some of the blame, is Lionair's training program of its pilots and its engineers. The first officer should never have been given the green light to fly in the first place, and then should have been grounded in April 2017 when, according to the captain training him in the simulator, he didn't understand the concept of a stall at high level or low level. Now let's just for a minute revisit the last episode. We highlighted the following over 3 days of operations of the crash aircraft. Maintenance errors or issues with the aircraft that should have had it grounded, 23. Faulty parts, 3. Errors by the pilots on the previous and the crash flight, 13. So it's not a pretty record at all. And all of these things can be traced back to cost cutting or bad training of pilots and or ground engineers by Lionair.
Yeah. At Greg Horton 803 also raises an interesting point. He says, why? Question mark. Why does every discussion of this accident skip over the fact that you're not supposed to change configuration while you have a stall warning indication? They had a stall warning stick shaker from liftoff, so they should not have raised the flaps. If they hadn't raised the flaps, there wouldn't have been an MCAS problem to deal with. The fact that the stall warning was because of a broken AOA unit, and that is actually irrelevant because you shouldn't have got there. You shouldn't have engaged the MCAS because you shouldn't have raised the flaps. What do you think about that one, Jeffrey?
Yeah, look, it's a great point from Greg, but of course, it's one of many, many failings by the crew who clearly were not trained properly by the airline. And for instance, one of the things we highlighted was the first officer was buried in the manuals trying to find the section that dealt with memory items. In other words, he didn't know what the memory items were. I mean, that's 101. You've got to know what the memory items are. They cover stab trim, they cover fire in the engines, and there's a few other things they cover as well. They are memory items. So yes, Greg, it's just one of many failings on this terrible, tragic flight.
Mary Beth McCoy reflects as follows. It seems, as in most aviation accidents, there was not a single cause, but rather a chain of events, including faulty maintenance, an unqualified pilot, a lack of safety features, as well as design oversights on the part of Boeing, which led to this accident. However, I still think that had Boeing not hit the existence of MCAS in order to bypass the requirement that pilots obtain additional training and achieve a type rating for the MAX, this tragedy could have likely been avoided. It is a sad fact that so many lives had to be lost because Boeing chose to favor its and the airline's pocketbooks rather than transparency with respect to MCAS system. To expect pilots to know how to respond to a system on their aircraft that they are not even aware exists is beyond lunacy. What do you think about that one, Jeffrey?
Yeah, well, Mary Beth, you do raise a great but complex question. On one hand, Boeing is trying to simplify the cockpit, so it's about simply fixing an issue quickly. As we said, there are four things that will cause a runaway stabilizer trim event in a Boeing 737 NG. On the MAX, there is five, MCAS being the fifth. Dealing with it is a memory item, and it has been in Boeing aircraft since 1959. Now, while the pilots were not aware of the source, and they are also not aware of the source of an engine fire either, how it started, what part of the engine's on fire, they don't know that. All they need to know is to shut down the fuel, pull the extinguishers, and land the plane. So the crew of the 737 involved in the accident the day before, faced with an identical problem, ran the memory item because they knew the memory item, shut down the runaway stabilizer, and everything was fine. Now, if they had written that up properly, which they didn't, the incoming crew would have read it when they did their pre-flight briefing. But they didn't do that either. Failure after failure. Now, one could ask the question, how can Boeing possibly be responsible for such utter incompetence? As I mentioned, the runaway stabilizer trim procedures and the use of cutout switches to disable electric trim trace back to the Boeing 707, which entered service in 1959. From the 707 onwards, Boeing used a trimmable horizontal stabilizer controlled both electrically via yoke-mounted switches and mechanically via a trim wheel in the cockpit. Because an electrical malfunction could cause continuous unwanted stabilizer motion, runaway trim, Boeing required a procedure to quickly disable the electric trim using stab trim cutout switches, then continue trimming manually with the wheel. This philosophy became a Boeing hallmark and was included in all subsequent Boeing models, even the legendary 747, and more recently the fly-by-wire 777 and 787. So let's look at Boeing's approach and compare it with Airbus's. The core idea, direct pilot override, must always exist. How it works: electrical trim via yoke switches. If it runs away, malfunction, pilots flip, stab, trim, cut out switches and use the manual trim wheel. Checklist: runaway stabilizer trim. It's a memory item. Isolate the system, then trim manually. This reflects Boeing's design heritage from the 1950s. Pilots always retain mechanical authority even when it requires some muscle effort. Now with Airbus, the core idea is to protect against runaway through flight control computers, eliminate the need for manual wheels. How it works: no big trim wheel, stabilizer is trimmed automatically by flight control computers to maintain neutral stick force. The pilots don't normally trim at all, the aircraft auto trims. Now, if the system misbehaves, pilots also can shut off two trim motors with stab, trim, cutout switches, which freezes the stabilizer, the same as Boeing. Elevator authority and multiple flight control computer channels provide redundancy. Checklist equivalent: stabilizer jam, stuck, trim. Handled with a side stick, not muscle power on the wheel. Now, since the grounding, the Boeing system works differently. Takes input from both AOA sensors, not one. Limited to one activation per event. Limit in authority: it can't trim more than the pilot can counter with elevator. Clearly documented in manuals and training. Regulators require updated runaway stabilizer procedures and extra simulated training for MAX pilots. So Mary Beth, a long answer to your great question, and I hope that does answer your question.
And if not, then feel free to come back with a comment, which we will deal with in a future
Yes.
episode.
Yeah.
So here's a bit of future shock from Christoph Burek 264. And he says, hello, Jeffrey and Richard. Timeless greetings to you gentlemen both. I found some of the revelations about piloting standards in this episode on the Lionair 737 MAX crash, episode 226, truly stunning and horrific. They surely strengthen the arguments of those in favor of completely replacing human pilots with autonomous systems. All you would then need at the top of the human command chain on board a commercial airliner is some kind of flight manager. After receiving confirmation from specifically trained ground crew that the walk around was satisfactory, the flight manager would just press a button to confirm that everyone was seated, and the plane just flies to its destination. The only task left to the flight manager would be things like deciding when to start meal service or going around the cabin conducting passenger satisfaction surveys. Do you see this as a foreseeable, realistic future possibility? Jeffrey.
Well, I think that cabin manager might also be going around the cabin to ask, do any of the passengers know how to fly the plane? Um,
Is there a doctor in the house?
exactly. Yeah. Look, great idea, Christoph, but I don't believe it will happen, as passengers would not accept it. I had a great chat to one of Boeing's top engineers about this very subject, and he said, sure, we're looking at it to see what we can learn to advance the cockpit design, but there is no way we can compute all the variables to make it an autonomous flight. He said there are simply too many variables. Now, when I'm asked on TV and radio that question, and I'm asked a lot, I simply say that when Microsoft perfects Windows I will fly on an autonomous aircraft. In other words, never. So that's the issue.
I get regular updates from Microsoft and
Yes.
sometimes on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Version 5,000. Yeah.
yeah. I think completely autonomous flight is a thing which is way, way into the future, at least 50 or 100 years away, but
Mm,
I won't be around to see it.
no.
So,
No.
Jeffrey, here's some more positive feedback from Man of Kent. Uh, a truly eye-watering line of events which led up to this tragic air crash, which, to my understanding, could have been avoided if penny-pinching mismanagement and incompetent maintenance had not played its part. For a layman like myself and the flying public, this is frightening, especially when safety is paramount. Excellent episodes, gents. And from Mr. Sispup, it's absurd. A Boeing 737 first officer doesn't know about a stall. Seriously, how did he get hired? And Jeff Daniel, 814, great summary and refresher regarding this accident. I found the links provided equally fascinating. Still does not change my overall opinion regarding the manner in which MCAS was implemented on the MAX 737. As Jeffrey pointed out, Boeing and Airbus both had to review their stance on cockpit simplification, whilst essential. At least hopefully the industry has learned from this and is not going to blindly rely on pilot training being a correct standard the world over. And finally, Craig Novi 2090, truly shocking. I had no idea of all the background disturbing information you shared. You both take the time to carefully and intelligently explain things without showboating. This is so rare and why I treasure this channel. Well, that's very kind. And
Mm.
what do you think of that, Jeffrey?
Yeah, look, great comments, and thanks very much indeed for the feedback. And I should mention, for those of you that haven't watched the episode that I'd highlighted called False Economy, I highly recommend it. Now, I know that initially I forgot to put the link in, but it is below, I promise you, once again, in the description below, and do have a look at it because it does delve deeply into the flying situation in Indonesia. So definitely worth watching.
Jeffrey, Boeing has taken a battering over this MAX and MCAS disaster, and there is considerable anti-Boeing sentiment, and some of our viewers have also made that very clear. Now, you have worked with Boeing for decades. Is this justified in your view?
Look, Richard, no, and we are going to cover the media coverage of these accidents after we do the Ethiopian one. But over the years, and I've been covering Boeing now for over 40 years, I've had the honour and the privilege to have met many of the chief designers at Boeing, as well as its various, in fact, all its CEOs over the years. And they are, to a man and a woman, caring and honourable individuals who are shattered by the MAX events, absolutely stunned by it. Sure, in a bid to simplify the cockpit and reduce complexity, something that has saved tens of thousands of lives over the past decades, they went too far. They made reasonable assumptions about the standard of skills and training that ended in utter tragedy. Huge lessons have been learned, not only by Boeing, but the entire industry, which will, in fact, save thousands of lives going forward. I also think most people only know Boeing from commercial aircraft. It's the plane that takes me on a holiday. But Boeing is so much more. The list is extraordinary, and there's a full list posted on our companion website, 42,000 feet, and there's a link below to all the products that Boeing makes. But in short, it builds the C-17 transport, the F-15 Eagle, F-18 Hornet, F-22 fighters for both the US Air Forces and air forces all over the world. And now it's building the new super stealth fighter, the F-47. It also builds launch rockets, a host of satellites, the GPS that guides your phone and guides you on your trips is built by Boeing. And guess what? The missile that sent it up there was built by Boeing as well. It goes on and on. Now, they also put together the International Space Station, for instance. So Boeing touches and protects our lives in so many ways, well beyond just getting on an aeroplane to take you on holiday. And they've got an extraordinary track record over the years of being basically the best in the business. And they've had some stumbles along the way, no question about it. But, to the core, they are an extraordinary company made up of some amazing individuals, and they don't deserve the bad rap they've had. Sure, as I said, they made some mistakes on this one, no question about it. But they don't deserve the bad rap they've got, Richard.
Yeah, and I think if you contrast, for example, a very famous Airbus crash was the Air France 447.
Mm.
And there's so many articles have been written about that, and even a study done by Harvard University on how pilots should have coped in that circumstances. Uh, but there hasn't been a bad publicity sticking to Airbus in the same way as with Boeing and the MAX and the MCAS.
Mm.
And it would be a fascinating episode when we go through the media and how the media dealt with the MAX and the MCAS. I think that will be quite revealing how public opinion can be manipulated by the media.
Well, when I say I was part of it, I was fighting it. I was immersed in the media at the time, working for a newspaper. And once the narrative has been set, it's like a tsunami. You can say all you like. And I had this discussion with Greg Fife from the former NTSB crash investigator, and he does lots of media, but he stopped doing media on the Max because, like me, the interviewer was criticizing him and saying, "Well, how can you say that? This plane is crook. They've hidden this. They've been devious. They've been." So it didn't matter what Greg said. It didn't matter. The narrative had been set. And that's a very, very, as you say, Richard, that's going to be a very, very interesting episode. And I can relate firsthand to exactly how that played out. And, some of the things that were said initially were completely incorrect, just complete nonsense. But that was popularist, and as I said, it became a tsunami of misinformation. And as I've said many times, there's so much misinformation about the Max and the MCAS that when the truth actually emerges, it's barely recognisable. So we'll hold that off for another episode because it goes beyond the Max. It actually enters all sorts of things that we read today. Are they true or are they not?
Yeah. And when we come back tomorrow to India,
Mm,
uh, the same thing is happening. The media grabbing hold of a particular stance. It was Boeing, it was Air India, it was the pilot. And once they've picked on a stance, that you can't convince them at all. I was on one TV show in India And they did let me put my point of view, but they made it clear that I got it wrong
Oh yeah,
because I
absolutely.
didn't say what they want me to
Yeah.
say.
So they introduce you. Here's Richard Godfrey, an aerospace expert from the United Kingdom, living in Germany, who's done this and done that and does that. They ask you a question. You say, well, no, that's not right. Well, how can you say that? You must be wrong. Well, hang on. You've
Yeah,
just introduced me as an expert and now you tell me I'm wrong. That's
it's like
exactly what happened to Greg and happened to me.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
like going to the doctor, and when he says, "Yeah, well, my diagnosis is this, and the treatment
Mm.
should be that," and you turn around and say, "No, I don't like that idea. I'm going to do another treatment."
Yeah.
So why did you go to the doctor? You know?
I'll get on to Google Doctor and get another opinion.
Yeah,
I'll go to the opinion that suits me. Yeah.
yeah.
So yes, look, as you alluded, Richard, we'll be back tomorrow with the first of two parts of an in-depth and very revealing look at Air India's maintenance of its 787-8s. We'll also be coming back on the weekend, next Sunday, with the Ethiopian crash of the Max 737 Max and analysing that. So, Richard, thank you very much indeed for helping me put this particular episode together today.
Ah, you're very welcome.
And viewers, please subscribe to us, please like us, please join us. Please keep those wonderful comments coming. I really do appreciate them very much indeed. They're very supportive and they're really great. And keep those fabulous questions coming. They're terrific. We do read them all. I can promise you that. And it takes us quite a few hours to go through them. We read them all and we do appreciate them very much. And do tune in tomorrow. So thank you very much.